let's go to our criminologist then, who's going to give us a sense of how we got here, the pivotal moments, and everything else in between. Dr. Simon Howell is a criminologist and joins us right now with regards to this story. Dr. Howell, appreciate the time. Thank you so much for joining us. Perhaps let me get a sense from your perspective then, the critical parts and the critical moments as you've seen them in this case.
I think the critical moments have been, on the one, the changing of sides that the one witness undertook, in the sense that she became a state witness, or they became a state witness. I think that was quite critical. I think there's been a lot of issues around the trial within a trial, so to speak, and the concerns around the police handling of the case and the handling of witness testimony. And I think, the big issue ultimately for me is what may happen with the ruling. I mean, so if the ruling goes towards and finds the accused guilty, then, this sets a precedent in all sorts of ways in terms of the broader criminal justice system, and as well as the Trafficking Act and the like. So it depends on the judgment for me. But those are the key parts that have thus far occurred.
Yeah, and you mentioned those key parts. I think we'll get into as many of them as we possibly can as well then. So how significant is the changing of the sides then of one of the witnesses, or one of those that were initially one of the co-accused? That's Laurentia Lombard's testimony. On
the one hand, it does, for me at least, it raises questions around the legitimacy of their testimony, but equally, it does show the power of changing of sides, so to speak, and the use of witness testimony in this way. We must remember that there is almost no physical evidence in this case that has been tried, and this is one of the key concerns or key issues around this case, is that there is no physical evidence, and that everything is really relying on witness testimony. So when witnesses then change, of course, and change their testimony, that can alter the outcome of the trial quite significantly. There's an ongoing concern in the sense that even with this trial, we're still we're no closer to understanding exactly what has happened to Joshlin, or where she is, or where she may be. And so, in ruling on this case, I think the judge is faced with a critical sort of condition, in the sense that he has to rule based on the lack of evidence, and then in doing so, he's ultimately needing to confront jurisprudence and our understanding of what evidence is utilized for in a court of law.
It's actually one of the questions that one of the people that have followed the show on X has actually also been asking, just with regards to this, saying the Joshlin case concludes today. I still don't know if she's dead or sold. The Sangoma was never found. Did the mother even take a stand? Why does it feel like the case was rushed? What are your thoughts? Was the case rushed?
Well, in the sense that, I think this case has been very much about the witnesses themselves, and it's been a public display of justice rather than a critical engagement with what has actually happened. For me, there's always been this underlying concern that at the end of the day, we still don't know what has happened, and we still don't have any evidence to show what has happened. So, whether the accused are found guilty or not, the key concern for me remains, why is there no evidence? How can there be no evidence in this entire thing that is actually physical? So for me, that's an ongoing concern. And I think it's going to be a concern for the judge himself, in the sense that he has to rule on this now. And, there is, without any evidence, he's ultimately relying on circumstantial concerns and witness testimony, which, while is useful, is never really been used in this way before, in sense of human trafficking and the use of the law, the trafficking law, in a domestic environment.
Circumstantial as it may be, the fact that the confessions of some of the accused was actually allowed to be admissible in this case, how pivotal then could that be in determining what happens?
Well, it's very pivotal, because the utilization of confessions has previously not been done that often, and as the key basis, or the primary basis for judgment, that is of course something very new. There was a concern around the confessions and their use within a court of law, as well as how they were obtained, and that sort of raises questions around policing and the use of or their engagement with these individuals specifically. But it also, there is a broader concern here, and that is that without the acknowledgement and use of witness testimony without any physical evidence is of course quite novel, and we'll see how the judge rules. But it is something that will ultimately rewrite the law book should it occur.
Yeah. What about the choice then by the accused not to testify? Does that work against them or for them?
Well, in this instance, I think it may, I'm not sure. I mean, it's a strategic move. In this instance, I think it worked against them, that they should have testified. But in other instances, it may be strategically useful to not testify. It really depends on the witness and their ability to cope with cross-examination and the like. In this instance, I don't think that would have been a good idea.
Yeah, so life terms here are possible. Is that what you would see from cases you follow?
Well, again, I'm not sure because, I mean, if we follow the rule of law thus far, then there would be life terms to be considered. But in this instance, again, because there's no physical evidence, it's very difficult to understand what the judge can rule on. Can you get a life term from witness testimony? That's the big crucial issue here. And I think, should that occur, then that rewrites the books quite significantly. If not, then I think the judge is forced to acknowledge that the lack of physical evidence remains a key concern, and as such, he'll rule on something less than a life term.
Yeah. So this case becomes very significant in setting a precedent, considering as well that the child still hasn't been found. And here we are already close to that judgment.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's been a heavy reliance on circumstantial evidence and oral testimony. And the lack of physical evidence is ultimately, there's a test around the legal definition here of trafficking, of exploitation, and of course the use of the Trafficking Act in a domestic sort of intrafamilial context. So how the judge rules will be critical as to to the outcomes of the case, but also critical in terms of the case's impact on the broader legal framework within South Africa. Because I mean, should the judge rule on this and find the individuals guilty, then of course you're setting quite a significant precedent as to what can be allowed and what is admissible within a court of law, and also, I mean, how you may construct a testimony and construct a judgment based on little or no physical evidence whatsoever.
Simon, you're the expert in criminology. In cases that you've worked on, cases you've seen, etc., has the state been able to prove without a shadow of a doubt that the three co-accused are indeed guilty?
No, I don't think so, to be honest, frankly. I mean, again, there is a need for evidence here. I mean, you can rely on witness testimony to so far, in my mind, but eventually there comes to a point where you have to question. There's always going to be doubt around witness testimony, especially in this instance where there's a lot of conflictual account. There's essentially, two streams of accounts here that have been laid out side by side, and which is true, no one really knows. And I think it'd be very difficult without physical evidence of knowing where Joshlin is or what has happened to judge on this case, definitively.